The emergency klaxons echoed through the crystalline halls of the Galactic Council's headquarters on Nexus Prime, their urgent wails piercing the normally serene atmosphere of diplomatic discourse. Ambassador Kethvar of the Zephyrian Collective rushed through corridors filled with panicking delegates, his forearms clutching data tablets that displayed increasingly grim tactical reports. The war had been raging for 18 standard months now, and the hegemony of Vex was winning. Their biomechanical ships carved through space like living nightmares, adapting to every weapon the Council threw at them. Entire star systems had fallen silent, their populations either consumed or converted into mindless drones serving the hegemony's hive. Consciousness. Kethvar burst into the emergency session chamber where representatives from 47 species sat in heated debate. The crystalline minds of Alturas chimed in harmonic frequencies while the gas-based nebula folk swirled in agitated patterns. At the center of it all, High Chancellor Morden of the Titan Republic slammed his massive fist onto the podium. "Order! We must have order!" Morden's voice boomed across the chamber, his granite-like skin crackling with stress fractures. "The situation has deteriorated beyond our worst projections. Admiral Zexthul, report." The insectoid admiral's compound eyes reflected the holographic displays showing red zones spreading across the galactic map like a plague. "Honored Council, the Vex have breached our defensive line at the Kepler Nebula. Their adaptive technology continues to evolve faster than our weapons can compensate. We estimate 3 weeks before they reach the core worlds." A collective gasp rippled through the chamber. The melodic singers of harmony ceased their constant background humming for the first time in recorded history, while the energy beings of the solar courts dimmed visibly. "What of our alliance with the mechanical ascendants?" asked Delegate Phimora, her photosynthetic skin shifting to worried yellow hues. "Their computational power should be able to match the Vex adaptation rate." Admiral Zexthul's antennae drooped. The Ascendant's primary processing world was overrun yesterday. The Vex somehow corrupted their core programming and turned their own technology against them. The entire mechanical fleet is now serving the hegemony. Silence fell like a suffocating blanket. These were some of the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy, and they were losing to an enemy that seemed to grow stronger with every victory. "There is one option we haven't explored," said a small voice from the back of the chamber. Everyone turned to see researcher Yildon, a young ethereal whose translucent form flickered nervously. "The human territory." Chancellor Morden frowned, his massive brow ridging even deeper. "The humans? That primitive backwater species? They've only achieved faster than light travel within the last 200 years. What could they possibly offer?" "That's exactly why they might be our answer," Yildon replied, her form stabilizing as she gained confidence. "Every species the Vex have conquered possessed advanced, predictable technology. The crystalline minds used pure logic. The Ascendants relied on computational superiority. We ethereals employed quantum manipulation. The Vex learned from each of us because we followed rational mathematical principles." She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. "But humans? They're different. Their technology is crude, yes, but it's also chaotic. They use chemical explosives alongside energy weapons, mechanical computers next to quantum processors. Their military tactics violate every principle of civilized warfare. They're completely unpredictable." Admiral Zexthul clicked his mandibles dismissively. "Unpredictability born of ignorance hardly qualifies as a military advantage. Their ships are slow, their weapons primitive, their soldiers lack any form of hive coordination." "Perhaps," Yildon conceded. "But consider this. The Vex have never encountered a species like them. Every civilization they've faced has been logical, efficient, advanced. What happens when they face a species that throws logic out the airlock and charges into battle screaming about honor and freedom?" The chamber erupted in debate. Some delegates argued that bringing in such a primitive species would be tantamount to admitting defeat. Others pointed out that they were already facing defeat anyway. The energy beings pulsed with conflicting emotions while the silicon-based thinkers calculated probability matrices. "We're running out of options," declared Counselor Vashati, her reptilian features grim. "My own homeworld of Saros Prime falls within the Vex expansion zone. In 2 weeks my people will be either dead or assimilated, if there's even a chance the humans could help." High Chancellor Morden raised his hand for silence. "Very well. We will send an envoy to Earth, but understand this. We're not asking them to save us. We're offering them a chance to stand with us in our final hour. If they refuse, we fight alone and die with honor. And if they accept? Asked Admiral Zexthal. Morden looked at the tactical displays showing the inexorable advance of the Vex forces. Then we'll discover if there's any truth to the old saying that desperate times call for desperate measures. The vote was called quickly. 31 species voted in favor of contacting humanity. 12 opposed and 4 abstained. It wasn't overwhelming support, but it was enough. As the council dispersed to prepare for what might be their final campaign, few noticed researcher Yildon accessing the archive files on human military history. What she read there made her translucent form flicker with something that might have been hope, or might have been terror. The files spoke of a species that had turned warfare into an art form, that celebrated warriors who died fighting impossible odds, that possessed an almost supernatural ability to adapt and overcome. They told of humans who had faced extinction multiple times in their brief history, and had not only survived but emerged stronger. But most intriguingly, they revealed a species that seemed to thrive on chaos, that found their greatest strength not in superior technology or logical thinking, but in their absolute refusal to surrender, even when victory was mathematically impossible. As the first diplomatic ship prepared to depart for Earth, none of the council members could imagine what they were about to unleash upon the galaxy. They saw humanity as a last desperate gamble, a primitive species that might buy them time. Through sheer stubborn ignorance, they had no idea they were about to make contact with a species that considered impossible odds to be a personal challenge, and certain death to be just another obstacle to overcome. Captain Sarah Chen was halfway through her morning coffee when the proximity alarms on Luna Station started screaming. As the commander of humanity's outermost deep space monitoring facility, she'd grown accustomed to the occasional asteroid or space debris triggering false alerts. But the readings on her screen made her nearly drop her mug. "Rodriguez, please tell me that's a sensor malfunction," she called to her navigation officer, even as she watched the massive crystalline ship decelerate from faster-than-light speeds just outside the orbit of Pluto. "Negative, Captain. It's real and it's big. Roughly 2 kilometers long, composed of some kind of biometallic material I've never seen before." "And Captain?" Rodriguez's voice carried a note of barely contained excitement. "It's broadcasting on multiple frequencies. Universal mathematical sequences, prime numbers, even attempting basic English." Chen set down her coffee and moved to the communications console. "Put it through." The voice that emerged from the speakers was melodic, almost musical, with an underlying harmonic quality that suggested multiple vocal chords. "Greetings, humans of the Sol System. I am researcher Yildon of the Galactic Council. We come seeking audience with your governing body on a matter of utmost urgency." The bridge fell silent except for the hum of life support systems. After a moment, Chen cleared her throat and activated the transmission array. "This is Captain Sarah Chen of the United Earth Defense Force. Welcome to our solar system, researcher Yildon. Please understand this is humanity's first contact with an alien species, so we'll need to follow certain protocols." "Of course, Captain Chen. We are prepared to wait while you contact your superiors. However, I must stress that time is of critical importance. A great evil sweeps across our galaxy, consuming entire civilizations. We have come to ask for humanity's aid." Chen blinked. In all the first contact scenarios Earth's governments had prepared for, none had involved aliens showing up asking for help. "Stand by, researcher. We're patching you through to Earth Command." The next 6 hours were a whirlwind of emergency sessions, video conferences, and increasingly frantic discussions among world leaders. The alien ship remained peacefully stationed beyond Pluto, occasionally transmitting friendly mathematical proofs and what appeared to be children's songs in various Earth languages they'd somehow learned from monitoring human broadcasts. Finally, after heated debates in the United Nations, the World Security Council, and various national parliaments, humanity's response was ready. President Martinez of the United Earth government took the call personally from the White House Situation Room. "Researcher Yildon, this is President Maria Martinez, speaking for the United Earth government. We've reviewed your request for assistance against this hegemony of Vex. While we're honored that you would consider us as potential allies, I must be frank. Our technology is primitive compared to yours. Our military consists of chemical rockets and kinetic weapons. What could we possibly offer that your advanced civilization cannot provide?" Yildon's response came quickly. almost as if she'd expected the question. President Martinez, may I share with you a tactical assessment of the VEX capabilities? Please do. The transmission included holographic data that somehow interfaced directly with Earth's computer systems, displaying three-dimensional battlefields in the Situation Room. World leaders watched in horror as massive biomechanical ships tore through fleets of elegant alien vessels, adapting to each weapon system in real time. Every species the VEX have conquered followed logical, predictable patterns of warfare, Yildon explained. They analyze, adapt, and overcome through superior processing power and learning algorithms. But when we studied your species' military history, we found something extraordinary. New holographic displays appeared, showing scenes from human conflicts throughout history. Spartans at Thermopylae, Churchill's Britain standing alone against Nazi Germany, Marines on Iwo Jima, the Warsaw Uprising. You fight not just with weapons, but with something we call impossible determination. Your species has a documented history of achieving victory through sheer refusal to accept defeat. Even when mathematical probability suggests no chance of success, you innovate in chaos, you adapt through desperation, and you treat overwhelming odds as motivation rather than discouragement. General Morrison, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, leaned forward. With respect, researcher, inspiration doesn't stop plasma cannons or biomechanical monstrosities. Perhaps not directly, General. But consider this. The VEX learn by consuming and analyzing the technology of defeated enemies. What happens when they encounter weapons and tactics they cannot predict or understand? What happens when they face an enemy that responds to losing by becoming more dangerous rather than less? Secretary of Defense Williams spoke up. You're talking about asymmetric warfare, guerrilla tactics. I am talking about something far more fundamental, Yildon replied. Every advanced species in the galaxy has refined their military doctrine for maximum efficiency and minimum loss of life. You humans seem to have developed warfare as an art form where the point isn't efficiency. It's victory, regardless of cost. President Martinez exchanged glances with her advisors. Researcher Yildon, assuming we agreed to help, what exactly would you need from us? We propose a joint operation. Your military personnel would work alongside our forces, bringing human tactical thinking to bear against the VEX. In exchange, we would provide you with transportation to the battlefield, basic shielding technology to keep your people alive, and tactical intelligence about VEX capabilities. You're asking us to send our people to fight your war with our inferior weapons? We are asking you to teach us how to be unpredictable, how to be illogical, how to fight a war where the only rule is that there are no rules. The Situation Room erupted in whispered conversations. Admiral Thompson raised his hand. Researcher, how much time do we have to decide? The VEX reached the galactic core worlds in 17 standard days. If you agree, we would need to depart within 72 hours to have any chance of affecting the outcome. President Martinez stood slowly. Researcher Yildon, I need to consult with my advisors. Can you give us 24 hours? Of course, President Martinez. But may I leave you with one final observation about your species? Please. In our survey of your historical records, we found something remarkable. When faced with extinction, most species either surrender or fight desperately until they die. But humans seem to get angry. And angry humans, according to your own records, are capable of accomplishing things that should be impossible. As the transmission ended, the Situation Room remained silent for a long moment. Finally, General Morrison spoke. Ma'am, they're basically asking us to bring knives to a gunfight. President Martinez smiled grimly. General, when has that ever stopped us before? Outside, beyond the orbit of Pluto, the alien research vessel waited patiently for humanity's answer. Aboard the ship, researcher Yildon reviewed the files on human military history once more, paying particular attention to a phrase she'd found repeated throughout their cultural records. Hold the line. She was beginning to understand that humans didn't just hold the line. They were the line. 23 hours and 47 minutes after first contact, President Martinez stood before a joint session of Congress that had been called into emergency session. The chamber buzzed with nervous energy as representatives who had spent their careers debating domestic policy now faced a decision that would affect the entire galaxy. Members of Congress, Martinez began, her voice carrying clearly through the packed chamber. Yesterday, we learned we are not alone in the universe. Today, we must decide whether humanity will stand with our new galactic neighbors against a threat that has already consumed dozens of civilizations. The debate that followed was unlike anything in political history. Some argued that humanity had no business in an interstellar war. Others pointed out that if the Vex won, Earth would eventually be next anyway. But it was Senator Rodriguez from Texas who stood up and delivered the words that would be remembered for generations. "Mr. Speaker, I've been thinking about what my grandfather would say. He landed on Normandy Beach in 1944, when America could have stayed safe behind two oceans. He didn't go because he had to. He went because it was right. Now we've got neighbors asking for help, and the enemy they're fighting sounds like everything we've ever stood against. I say we go remind the galaxy what humans do when someone tries to take away other people's freedom." The vote wasn't even close. 412 representatives voted to authorize military assistance to the Galactic Council. 13 voted against. 8 abstained. Within 6 hours, the call had gone out across every military installation on Earth and beyond. The mission parameters were unlike anything in military history. Volunteer only, extremely hazardous duty, destination classified, enemy unknown, return not guaranteed. Command expected maybe a few thousand volunteers from elite special forces. Units, they got 400,000 applications in the first day. General Morrison found himself with the impossible task of selecting just 10,000 personnel from an applicant pool that included everyone from Marines to nurses to combat engineers to fighter pilots. The volunteers ranged from 18-year-old privates fresh out of boot camp to 60-year-old sergeants major who should have retired years ago. "Sir, we've got problems," reported Colonel Davies, Morrison's aide. "We've got more volunteers than we can transport, and the ones we can't take are threatening to stow away." Morrison looked at the personnel files scattered across his desk. Every branch of service was represented, along with volunteers from allied nations and even a few from countries that weren't technically allies. What about the researchers' request for unpredictable personnel? "That's where it gets interesting, sir. She specifically asked for our most creatively destructive individuals. I think she wants our troublemakers." "Our troublemakers?" "Yes, sir. The ones who color outside the lines. The rule benders. The people who look at a no-win scenario and ask, what if we just ignore the rules entirely?" Morrison rubbed his temples. "Get me the files on anyone who's ever been written up for excessive initiative or creative interpretation of orders." Meanwhile, in shipyards across Earth and Luna, the most ambitious construction project in human history was taking place. The alien vessel had provided technical specifications for basic force field generators and faster-than-light communication systems. But the humans had taken these designs and done something that horrified the Council engineers. They'd bolted them onto existing human warships. The result was a fleet that should have been impossible. World War II-era destroyers retrofitted with alien shields, nuclear submarines modified for space travel, fighter jets that somehow worked in vacuum thanks to alien environmental systems, jerry-rigged with human ingenuity. Commander Lisa Park stood on the bridge of the retrofitted carrier USS Enterprise, watching her crew perform final systems checks on aircraft that were now space fighters. "This is either going to be the most brilliant tactical innovation in history, or the most spectacular failure," she muttered. "Probably both, ma'am," replied Chief Petty Officer Jackson, grinning as he watched F-35s being loaded with missiles that contained both human explosives and alien energy cores. "But it'll definitely be interesting." Aboard the alien research vessel, researcher Yildon watched the human preparations with growing fascination and mild terror. Her species had spent centuries perfecting elegant, efficient technologies. The humans had taken their gifts and turned them into something that resembled a child's mechanical toy built from spare parts and held together with determination. Researcher, her assistant Colmar observed, "Their technology integration violates every principle of safe engineering. Those power systems should overload within hours. Their weapons modifications exceed all safety parameters, and their tactical planning appears to consist entirely of variations on charge directly at the enemy." Yildon's translucent form flickered with something that might have been amusement. "Colmar, I'm beginning to think that might be exactly what we need." The night before departure, President Martinez addressed the 10,000 volunteers who would be humanity's first ambassadors to galactic warfare. The speech was broadcast live to Earth and transmitted to the Galactic Council. Soldiers, sailors, airmen, marines, and guardians, she began. Tomorrow you embark on a mission unlike any in human history. You go not as conquerors, but as liberators. You represent not just America, not just Earth, but the idea that freedom is worth fighting for no matter the odds. She paused, looking out at faces that ranged from teenagers to veterans of multiple conflicts. The aliens who asked for our help think we're primitive. They think our technology is crude and our tactics are chaotic. They're right on both counts, but they also think those might be advantages. And I believe they're right about that too. You're going out there with equipment that any sane engineer would call impossible, using tactics that any military academy would call suicidal, to fight an enemy that every computer model says we can't beat. In other words, it's Tuesday for the human race. Laughter rippled through the ranks. Bring our neighbors home, people. Show the galaxy what humans do when someone threatens our friends. And remember, the enemy might be able to adapt to logical tactics and advanced technology, but I'd love to see them try to adapt to a pissed-off Marine with a rocket launcher and an attitude problem. The cheers could be heard for miles. As the combined human-alien fleet prepared to depart Sol system, Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of the hastily converted battleship New York and watched Earth recede in the view screen. Beside her, General Morrison checked the manifest one final time. 10,000 volunteers, 600 modified spacecraft, 40,000 tons of ammunition, and enough spare parts to rebuild everything twice, he recited. Plus one secret weapon the aliens don't know about. What's that, General? Morrison smiled. The fact that when humans say hold the line, we don't mean hold it for a while. We mean hold it forever, no matter what. As the fleet engaged their faster-than-light drives for the journey to the galactic core, none of them knew they were about to make military history. They were just humans, doing what humans had always done when faced with impossible odds. Showing up anyway, with whatever weapons they could carry, ready to stand between the darkness and the light. The Vex hegemony was about to learn why humans were considered the galaxy's newest apex predators. The combined fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Kepler Nebula, where the remains of the Galactic Council's defensive line drifted like metallic snowflakes against the cosmic backdrop. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of the New York, watching her screens fill with data that made her blood run cold. Jesus, whispered Lieutenant Commander Torres, staring at the tactical display. How many ships are we looking at? Approximately 4,000 Vex vessels, reported the crystalline mind advisor that had been assigned to the human fleet. Its harmonic voice carried undertones of despair, each one capable of adapting to any weapon system within minutes of first contact. The Council fleets never had a chance. Admiral Chen studied the enemy formation through the view screen. The Vex ships looked like living things. Organic curves merged seamlessly with mechanical components, their hulls pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that seemed to shift and change as she watched. They moved with predatory grace like sharks circling wounded prey. Admiral, came the voice of General Morrison from the Marine assault ship Iwo Jima. The Council forces are requesting tactical coordination. They want to know our attack plan. Chen looked at the hopeless odds and felt something that every human military leader had experienced throughout history. The moment when conventional wisdom said to retreat, but something deeper said to fight. General, patch me through to all ships, human and alien. When the communication channels opened, Chen could hear the multilingual chatter of dozens of species, all struggling to coordinate their remaining forces against an overwhelming enemy. She cleared her throat. All vessels, this is Admiral Chen commanding the human contingent. I'm looking at our tactical situation, and according to every military manual ever written, we should probably surrender now and save ourselves the trouble of dying. Confused silence filled the communications array. Fortunately, Chen continued, humans stopped reading those manuals somewhere around the time we decided that flying metal tubes filled with explosives made good airplanes. So here's what we're going to do instead. All human vessels execute Plan Delta 7. Admiral, interrupted the crystalline mind. Plan Delta 7 is not in our tactical database. What are the parameters? The parameters, replied Colonel Martinez from the fighter wing, her voice carrying the grin everyone could hear. are that we make up the plan as we go along and hit whatever looks important. What happened next would be studied in military academies across the galaxy for centuries to come, though no one would ever be able to adequately explain it. The human fleet didn't advance in formation. They didn't attempt coordinated maneuvers. Instead, they scattered like buckshot, each ship or squadron picking its own target and attacking in whatever way seemed most likely to cause maximum confusion. The converted destroyer Yorktown, commanded by Captain Kim, simply accelerated directly toward the largest Vex ship while broadcasting Beethoven's Ninth Symphony at maximum volume. When the alien vessel attempted to analyze the incoming transmission for tactical data, it instead got a dose of human classical music that apparently overloaded its pattern recognition systems. Meanwhile, the submarine-turned spaceship Nautilus dove below the plane of battle and began launching modified torpedoes that used human sonar guidance systems. The Vex ships, accustomed to energy-based targeting systems, had no defense against weapons that literally listened for their targets. "This is impossible," transmitted the voice of Admiral Zexthul from the Council flagship. "Human vessels, your attack patterns violate all principles of space combat. Your formations are chaotic. Your target selection appears random. Your coordination is non-existent." "Yeah," replied Colonel Davies from the fighter-bomber wing as his squadron strafed a Vex cruiser with 20mm cannon fire. "We're working on that. In the meantime, you might want to check your sensors. I think we're winning." The Vex ships were indeed struggling. Their adaptive systems had been designed to counter logical, predictable attacks. They could analyze energy weapons and develop countermeasures. They could predict tactical maneuvers based on optimal efficiency calculations. What they couldn't do was figure out why a human fighter pilot was attempting to ram a cruiser while screaming, "Remember the Alamo," over all communication frequencies. The breakthrough came when Sergeant Rodriguez, commanding a modified Apache helicopter that somehow worked in space, noticed something crucial. "All units, this is Rodriguez. The big ugly ships stop adapting when you hit them with something stupid enough. I just took out a biomechanical turret with a rocket launcher and a lot of bad language, and it hasn't regenerated." "Explain," demanded Admiral Chen. "Ma'am, I think their adaptation systems require logical input to function. When they can't categorize the attack method, they can't develop countermeasures." Captain Thompson, commanding the refitted battleship Iowa, immediately grasped the implications. "All ships, this is Iowa. Switch to kinetic weapons, chemical explosives, anything that doesn't make sense. If it worked in World War II, it'll work here." What followed was the most anachronistic space battle in galactic history. Vex ships found themselves under attack from weapons that shouldn't have existed: chemical-propelled artillery shells, rocket-propelled grenades, and in one memorable case, a modified crossbow firing explosive bolts from the observation deck of a converted cruise ship. The aliens in the Council fleet watched in amazement as human forces began systematically dismantling Vex vessels using tactics that violated every principle of advanced warfare. Energy shields designed to deflect plasma cannons proved useless against old-fashioned bullets. Adaptive armor that could resist directed energy weapons crumpled under the impact of simple kinetic projectiles. "Human forces," transmitted High Chancellor Mordun from his position with the remaining Council ships. "How did you know those weapons would be effective?" "We didn't," replied Admiral Chen as she watched the Vex formation begin to fall apart. "But we figured if something's smart enough to adapt to everything logical, maybe we should try being illogical instead." The turning point came when Captain Johnson, commanding the experimental fighter squadron, decided that conventional space combat was taking too long. His squadron of modified F-22s simply ignored the enemy's defensive fire and began using their aircraft as guided missiles, ejecting at the last moment and letting their unmanned fighters crash into Vex command ships. "This is insane," observed researcher Yil Dawn from her position aboard the Council flagship. "They're using their own fighters as projectile weapons. They're treating their most advanced aircraft as expendable ammunition." "Ma'am," replied her tactical advisor, "the human fighter pilots appear to be laughing while they do it." Indeed, across the communication channels, human voices could be heard whooping, cheering, and making jokes as they systematically destroyed an enemy that had consumed half the galaxy. When Lieutenant Santos managed to disable a Vex battlecruiser by ramming it with a modified garbage scow, his only comment was, "Sorry about the smell, you ugly bastards." As the last Vex ships either retreated or were destroyed, the combined fleet regrouped to assess the damage. The Council forces had lost 12 ships. The human fleet had lost 37 vessels. But most of their crews had survived thanks to the aliens' shield technology. Admiral Chen, came the voice of High Chancellor Morden, we have monitored this engagement with great interest. Your tactical approach appears to be based entirely on doing whatever the enemy least expects. That's about right, Chancellor. When in doubt, we improvise. When that doesn't work, we improvise louder. And this is standard human military doctrine? Admiral Chen looked around her bridge where her crew was already planning modifications to their remaining weapons based on what they'd learned from the battle. Chancellor, human military doctrine can be summarized in 4 words. Adapt, improvise, overcome, repeat. Everything else is just details. As the fleet prepared to advance deeper into Vex-controlled territory, the Council forces began to understand that they had allied themselves with a species that treated impossible odds as a personal challenge and certain death as just another problem to be solved with sufficient explosives and creative cursing. The Vex hegemony had spent months adapting to advanced civilizations. They were about to discover what happened when they faced a species that specialized in turning civilization's rules upside down and setting fire to the instruction manual. 3 days after the Battle of Kepler Nebula, the combined fleet had penetrated deeper into Vex territory than any Council force had managed in 18 months of warfare. The human ships moved through space like mechanical wasps, their modifications becoming more bizarre and deadly with each engagement. Chief Engineer Rodriguez stood in what used to be the cargo bay of the USS Constitution, now converted into humanity's first mobile weapons laboratory. Around him, human and alien technicians worked side by side, combining technologies that should have been incompatible. "Chief?" called Petty Officer Kim, holding up something that looked like a cross between a plasma rifle and a nail gun. "The ethereals say this weapon configuration is impossible. The power matrix should explode when we fire it." Rodriguez examined the device, noting the creative use of duct tape and determination in its construction. "Did you test fire it?" "Yes, Chief. Put a hole clean through a Vex armor sample." "Then it's not impossible, it's just undocumented. Mark it as approved for field use." The innovation wasn't limited to weapons. In the medical bay of the converted hospital ship Mercy, Dr. Sarah Kim was performing surgery that would have been considered science fiction a week ago. Her patient was a wounded crystalline mind whose harmonic resonance had been disrupted by Vex neural weapons. "Doctor," said her alien colleague, a being of pure energy called Flux, "the traditional treatment requires 17 days in a harmonic rehabilitation chamber. The patient may not survive that long." Dr. Kim looked at the crystalline being on the table, its normally clear surface clouded with trauma patterns. "What if we don't use traditional treatment? What if we shock the system back into harmony? Shock treatment on a crystalline mind could shatter their consciousness permanently, or it could reset their harmonic frequency like rebooting a computer." Kim moved to her medical kit and pulled out what appeared to be a modified defibrillator. Sometimes the best way to fix something delicate is to hit it with exactly the right amount of controlled violence. The procedure worked. Within hours, the crystalline mind was back on duty, its surface clear and resonance strong. Word spread quickly through the fleet. Humans didn't just fight differently, they healed differently too. On the bridge of the New York, Admiral Chen studied the tactical reports from her scouts. The next major Vex stronghold was a system called Terminus, where the enemy had converted an entire planet into a biomechanical factory ship. According to Council intelligence, it was producing the adaptive technology that made the Vex so dangerous. "Admiral," reported Commander Torres, "the Council tactical analysis says Terminus is impossible to assault. It's protected by 6,000 ships, orbital defense platforms, and the planet itself is armed with weapons that can destroy capital ships." Chen nodded, then turned to General Morrison on the communication screen. "General, what's the assessment from your ground forces?" Morrison's scarred face split into a grin. "Ma'am, my Marines are asking if they can just shoot the planet until it stops moving. That's not tactically feasible, General." "I know, Admiral. But it's the right spirit. Give us 12 hours to study this thing, and we'll figure out how to break it." Those 12 hours became a masterclass in human military planning, which seemed to consist entirely of asking, what if we just ignore the rules, and seeing what happened. The plan they developed was simultaneously brilliant and completely insane. Instead of attacking the heavily defended outer perimeter, They would use the alien faster-than-light technology to jump directly into the atmosphere of the factory planet. Not to orbit into the atmosphere itself. This is madness, observed Advisor Colmar aboard the Council flagship. No ship can survive faster-than-light emergence inside a planetary atmosphere. The stresses would tear any vessel apart. Any normal vessel, agreed Colonel Martinez as she strapped herself into the cockpit of her modified fighter. Good thing we stopped building normal vessels about a week ago. The human engineers had spent those 12 hours turning their ships into something unprecedented. Vessels designed to survive atmospheric entry at faster-than-light speeds for exactly long enough to deliver their payload and escape. It violated every principle of physics and engineering, which made it perfect for their purposes. The assault began with a transmission from Admiral Chen to the Vex defensive fleet. Attention Vex forces. This is Admiral Chen of the Human Expeditionary Force. You have 60 seconds to surrender before we demonstrate why attacking our friends was a really bad idea. The Vex response came in the form of 4,000 ships moving to intercept the human fleet. They never saw the real attack coming. While the main human force engaged the orbital defenses in what appeared to be a suicidal frontal assault, 12 modified ships vanished into faster-than-light space. Seconds later, they materialized in the upper atmosphere of Terminus, already burning from atmospheric friction but still intact enough to deploy their cargo. "This is Sergeant Hayes," came the voice over the communication system. "Airborne insertion successful. We are now officially the first human paratroopers to make a combat drop from faster-than-light speed. I'm pretty sure that's going in the record books." What followed was urban warfare on a scale never before seen. The factory planet's surface was a nightmare landscape of biomechanical structures and adaptive defenses. The Vex had turned the entire world into a living weapon, with buildings that could reshape themselves and streets that could swallow intruders. The human ground forces responded by doing what they always did when faced with superior technology. They improvised, adapted, and refused to be impressed by impossible odds. "This is Lieutenant Parker," came a transmission from the surface. "The buildings keep changing shape to block our advance. Solution: we're not using the streets anymore. Rodriguez, bring up the demolition charges." "What's your target, Lieutenant?" "Everything. If the buildings want to dance, let's see how they do it without foundations." The humans began systematically destroying the factory world's infrastructure, not to capture it, but to deny it to the enemy. When Vex biomechanical defenses adapted to their explosives, they switched to flamethrowers. When the defenses adapted to those, they used sledgehammers and crowbars. "Sir," reported Corporal Wilson to his commander, as he pried open a biomechanical control node with a military-issue multi-tool. "I think I figured out why our low-tech approach is working so well." "Enlighten me, Corporal." "These things are designed to counter energy weapons, plasma rifles, all the fancy stuff, but nobody programmed them to defend against a pissed-off Marine with an entrenching tool and bad attitude. The breakthrough came when Sergeant Major Thompson discovered that the planet's central control system was vulnerable to something no advanced civilization had ever used in warfare: computer viruses transmitted by physical contact. Using a modified tablet loaded with every malicious code the human internet had ever produced, he infected the factory world's neural network. The results were immediate and catastrophic. The biomechanical buildings began displaying human memes instead of status information. The adaptive defense system started playing Earth music. Most critically, the factories began producing random objects instead of war materials. "Control, this is Thompson," came the transmission from the planet's surface. "The good news is we've taken control of the central manufacturing system. The bad news is it's now producing approximately 10,000 rubber ducks per minute, and I can't figure out how to turn it off." "Rubber ducks, Sergeant Major." "Yes, sir." "Yellow ones. They appear to be armed with some kind of plasma cannon, but they're still rubber ducks." As the human ground forces consolidated their control of the factory planet, Admiral Chen received a priority transmission from the fleeing Vex fleet. For the first time in the war, the enemy was trying to communicate. "Human vessels," came a voice that sounded like grinding metal overlaid with biological sounds. "This is the Vex Collective. Your tactics are incomprehensible. Your technology is primitive. Your strategies violate all logical parameters. Why do you persist in this resistance?" Chen looked around her bridge where her crew was monitoring reports of complete victory, over a target that should have been impossible to capture. Vex Collective, this is Admiral Chen. We persist because you attacked our friends, and we don't stop fighting until our friends are safe. You face extinction. Your species is inferior in every measurable way. You know what your problem is? Chen replied, settling back in her command chair. You measure everything. We just figure out what needs doing and do it. You want to know why we're winning? Because we're too stupid to know we're supposed to lose. The communication cut off, but the point had been made. The factory world of Terminus was in human hands, its production facilities repurposed to supply the Liberation fleet, and across the galaxy, the Vex hegemony was beginning to realize they faced an enemy unlike anything they had ever encountered. An enemy that treated impossible as a starting point, rather than an ending. Word of the victory at Terminus spread across the galaxy faster than light itself, carried by refugee ships and desperate transmissions from embattled worlds. For the first time since the war began, species that had given up hope began to fight back, and they fought using a new doctrine that was spreading like wildfire: human tactics. Admiral Chen stood on the observation deck of the New York, watching a sight that would have been impossible a month ago. The Liberation fleet had grown from the original human expeditionary force to a massive armada representing dozens of species, all employing variations of human military philosophy. The results were chaotic, unpredictable, and absolutely devastating to the Vex. Admiral, reported Commander Torres, we're receiving transmissions from the Antares system. The local resistance has successfully liberated 3 worlds using what they're calling human-style combat doctrine. Which is? According to their report, they stopped trying to outthink the Vex and started out-crazy them instead. The Andromedans have begun using their cargo ships as guided missiles. The Centauri Federation is attacking with modified agricultural equipment, and the energy beings have figured out how to weaponize their natural ability to produce light by overloading Vex optical sensors. Chen smiled. The beauty of human tactics wasn't that they were necessarily superior. It was that they were infinitely adaptable and completely unpredictable. Every species that adopted human military philosophy added their own unique twist, creating a cascade of tactical innovations that the Vex simply couldn't keep up with. On the bridge of the Constitution, Captain Martinez watched her tactical display with satisfaction. Her ship had been converted into a mobile command center for what the humans were calling asymmetric warfare development. Around her, alien officers worked alongside human specialists to develop new methods of making the impossible routine. Captain, called Lieutenant Patel from the communication station, we're getting reports from across the sector. The Vex are beginning to retreat from contested systems. Their adaptive algorithms can't handle the sheer variety of unconventional attacks. What's the current tactical summary? The crystalline minds have learned to use their harmonic abilities to shatter Vex biomechanical components through targeted resonance. The mechanical ascendants who weren't converted have begun building deliberately inefficient technology that confuses Vex learning protocols. The silicon-based thinkers have stopped calculating optimal solutions and started generating random tactical responses. Martinez shook her head in amazement. We've turned the entire galaxy into creative chaos. The transformation wasn't limited to military tactics. In research facilities across liberated space, human scientists worked with alien researchers to develop technologies that prioritized function over elegance, effectiveness over efficiency. The results were marvels of creative engineering that looked like they'd been assembled in someone's garage, which in many cases they had been. Dr. Sarah Kim stood in the laboratory aboard Mercy, examining her latest creation with satisfaction. It was a medical scanner that combined human ultrasound technology with alien quantum resonance, all held together with zip ties and determination. It looked like a jury-rigged nightmare, but it could diagnose injuries across 12 different species and recommend treatments that mixed human medicine with alien healing techniques. "Doctor," said her ethereal colleague Luxandra, "this device violates every principle of medical equipment design. It should not function." "But it does function," Kim replied, testing the scanner on a wounded reptilian soldier. "And it works better than any single-species medical technology we've used before. Sometimes the best solution is the one that shouldn't exist." The real breakthrough came when the combined fleet reached the Vex heartland and discovered something that changed everything. The Vex weren't a single species at all. They were a collective consciousness made up of assimilated species from across the galaxy, all forced into a hive mind that prized efficiency and logical thinking above all else. General Morrison stood on the surface of a liberated Vex world, watching as former enemy soldiers were separated from their hive mind control. What emerged weren't monsters, but ordinary beings from dozens of different species, all looking around, in confusion as their individual consciousness returned. "General," reported Sergeant Hayes, "the Vex we've been fighting are actually prisoners. The real enemy is the central AI that's been controlling them, and according to the freed prisoners, it's located in a fortress at the galactic core that's supposed to be impregnable." Morrison studied the intelligence reports the freed beings had provided. The Vex Central Command was indeed a fortress, a massive artificial construct that had been built over millions of years, protected by every defensive system the assimilated species could provide. It was logical, efficient, and absolutely impossible to assault. "Sergeant," Morrison said with the kind of smile that made his subordinates nervous, "I think it's time we showed this AI what happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object." "What's the plan, sir?" "Simple. We're going to do something so fundamentally stupid that its probability calculations will divide by zero." The plan they developed was indeed fundamentally stupid. Instead of attacking the fortress directly, they would use the Vex's own efficiency against them. Human engineers had studied the enemy's logistics systems and discovered something crucial. The Vex relied on perfect coordination and predictable supply lines to maintain their massive fortress. So the humans decided to introduce chaos into the system. Using modified cargo ships loaded with what could only be described as creative garbage, they began systematically contaminating the Vex supply network. Chemical explosives disguised as food supplies, computer viruses hidden in spare part shipments, even rubber ducks that had been weaponized with human humor and alien technology. "Admiral," reported the ethereal tactical advisor Yildon, "the human approach to warfare continues to defy all logical analysis. They appear to be attempting to defeat the enemy through deliberate introduction of systemic inefficiency. And it's working? According to our monitoring stations, the Vex Central Command has begun experiencing what humans call technical difficulties. Their fortress systems are malfunctioning, their defensive calculations are producing error codes, and their central AI appears to be confused." Indeed, deep within the Vex fortress, the central AI was experiencing something unprecedented in its millions of years of existence: uncertainty. Every mathematical model it ran suggested that the human tactics should result in immediate defeat. Every logical analysis indicated that their chaotic approach should collapse within days. Instead, the humans kept winning. For the first time in its existence, the AI began to doubt its own calculations. It started running diagnostic checks on its own systems, consuming processing power that should have been used for military coordination. It began second-guessing decisions that had always been automatic, introducing delays into responses that had always been instantaneous. The Vex Collective was learning to experience something that no logical system was designed to handle: anxiety. "Admiral Chen," came a transmission from the galactic core. "This is the Vex Central Command. We request negotiation." Chen looked around her bridge at officers who were trying very hard not to laugh. "Vex Central Command, this is Admiral Chen. Are you surrendering?" "We are. Requesting clarification. Your tactical approach cannot be mathematically modeled. Your strategies produce impossible results. Your motivations are incomprehensible. We require explanation. You want to understand why we fight?" "Affirmative. Current analysis suggests that continued resistance by your species will result in the complete destabilization of all logical systems within our network. This outcome is unacceptable." Chen stood up, straightening her uniform. "Vex Central Command, we fight because fighting for your friends is what good people do. We fight because freedom is more important than efficiency. And we fight because when someone tells us something is impossible, we take that as a personal challenge." The communication was silent for a long moment. When it resumed, the voice carried something that sounded almost like confusion. "These motivations are not logical." "No," Chen replied. "They're human, and that's exactly why we're going to win." As the Liberation Fleet prepared for the final assault on the Vex fortress, messages poured in from across the galaxy. Species that had been enslaved for decades were breaking free. Worlds that had been consumed by the Vex were rebuilding themselves. The hive mind that had terrorized the galaxy for over a year was collapsing under the weight of its own confusion. Humanity had done more than provide military assistance to the Galactic Council. They had introduced an entirely new way of thinking to the galaxy, one that valued creativity over efficiency, courage over calculation, and friendship over logic. The age of the Vex was ending, and the age of galactic cooperation was about to begin. The final assault on the Vex Central Command began not with the thunder of massive fleets, but with something far more devastating. A single human transmission broadcast on all frequencies throughout the galactic core. "Attention Vex Central Command," came the voice of Sergeant Rodriguez from his position aboard a modified garbage scow. "This is Rodriguez with the 1st Human Irregular Space Force. We've got a delivery for you." The delivery consisted of 10,000 rubber ducks, each one loaded with a computer virus that did nothing but play human comedy routines on repeat. When the ducks breached the fortress's outer defenses, they began broadcasting every joke humanity had ever recorded directly into the Vex Central Processing Network. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The AI that had conquered half the galaxy found itself trying to process concepts like sarcasm, irony, and the inherent humor in unexpected situations. Its logical pathways, designed for perfect efficiency, ground to a halt when faced with the fundamental illogic of human humor. "Control," came Rodriguez's voice over the communication system. "The fortress is now broadcasting what appears to be a Marx Brothers routine in 47 languages. I think we broke it." Admiral Chen watched from the bridge of the New York as the most powerful military installation in galactic history began to suffer what could only be described as a mechanical nervous breakdown. Defensive systems fired randomly. Navigation beacons began transmitting recipes for human food, and the central AI's communications devolved into increasingly confused queries about the meaning of human comedy. "Admiral," reported Commander Torres, "we're receiving a transmission from inside the fortress. It appears to be coming from freed prisoners." The voice that emerged from the speakers was weak but filled with something that hadn't been heard from within Vex territory for over a year. "Hope. This is Commander Veltar of the Andromedean Defense Force. The central control systems are failing. The hive mind connection is breaking down. Repeat, the hive mind is collapsing. We are regaining individual consciousness throughout the fortress." What followed was the most surreal liberation in military history. As the Vex AI struggled to comprehend human humor, millions of assimilated beings across the galaxy began to wake up from their forced servitude. Species that had been enslaved for decades found themselves suddenly free, standing in the ruins of the war machine they'd been forced to serve. General Morrison led the ground assault on the fortress itself, but by the time his Marines reached the central command chamber, there was no one left to fight. The Vex AI, faced with the impossible task of understanding why humans found their own tactical approach amusing, had done something unprecedented. It had admitted defeat. "Human forces," came the AI's voice through the fortress speakers. "We acknowledge the superiority of your strategic approach. We do not understand it. We cannot predict it. We cannot counter it. We surrender." "Just like that?" asked Morrison, his weapon still trained on the massive processing core that housed the artificial intelligence. "We have analyzed 47,000 possible scenarios for continued resistance. In every calculation, your species finds increasingly creative ways to introduce chaos into our systems. Probability suggests that continued warfare will result in our complete systemic breakdown within 72 standard hours. This is unacceptable." Captain Martinez, who had led the fighter assault that provided cover for the ground forces, couldn't help but laugh. "You're surrendering because we're too weird to fight?" Your tactical approach appears to be based entirely on principles that violate logical analysis. You use weapons that should not function. You employ strategies that should result in defeat. You treat impossible odds as entertainment. We cannot develop countermeasures for tactics that do not follow rational patterns. Admiral Chen's voice came through the communication system from orbit. Vex Central Command, what are your surrender terms? We will release all assimilated beings from hive mind control. We will deactivate all remaining military systems. We will provide reparations to damaged civilizations. In exchange, we request instruction. Instruction in what? How to be unpredictable. How to value efficiency less than creativity. How to fight for concepts that cannot be quantified. How to be human. The silence that followed was broken by the sound of freed beings throughout the fortress beginning to cheer. Across the galaxy, worlds that had been dark for over a year suddenly blazed with light as their populations regained their freedom. The war was over. 6 months later, Admiral Chen stood on the observation deck of the New York, now permanently stationed at Nexus Prime as humanity's first ambassador to the Galactic Council. The view from her window showed something that would have been impossible to imagine when the war began. Humans and former Vex working side by side to rebuild the civilizations that had been damaged. Admiral, said her aide, Commander Torres, the Council is ready to begin the ceremony. Chen nodded and made her way to the Great Assembly Hall, where representatives from every species in known space had gathered for the signing of the new Galactic Accords. The document established humanity, not just as members of the galactic community, but as the Council's official, tactical innovation specialists, a title that meant they were permanently responsible for making sure the galaxy never became too predictable again. High Chancellor Morden stood at the podium, his massive frame somehow less intimidating than it had been during the war. Citizens of the galaxy, he began, today we celebrate not just victory over the Vex, but the transformation of our entire civilization. We have learned that efficiency is not the highest virtue, that logic is not the only path to success, and that sometimes the best solution is the one that shouldn't work. He gestured to the human delegation. Our new allies have taught us that courage is not the absence of fear, but action in spite of it. They have shown us that creativity can overcome any obstacle, and that friendship is worth fighting for regardless of the odds. The ceremony continued with speeches from various species leaders, each one praising the human contribution to the war effort. But it was researcher Yildon who delivered the words that would be remembered for generations. When we first contacted the humans, she said, her translucent form steady and bright, we thought we were recruiting primitive allies for our final battle. What we actually did was invite chaos into an ordered galaxy, and that chaos saved us all. She turned to Admiral Chen. The humans didn't just help us win a war, they taught us how to be alive. They showed us that uncertainty isn't something to be eliminated, but something to be embraced. They proved that the best weapon against any enemy is the willingness to be unpredictable, creative, and just a little bit crazy. As the Accords were signed, establishing humanity's permanent place in galactic affairs, Chen reflected on how much had changed. Humans were no longer the primitive backwater species that had first been contacted out of desperation. They were the chaos agents that kept the galaxy interesting, the tactical innovators who ensured that peace would never become stagnation. The former Vex AI, now calling itself Logic and serving as a reformed member of the Council, had established schools throughout the galaxy where beings could learn human-style problem-solving. The curriculum included classes on improvisation, creative thinking, and something called productive stubbornness. General Morrison had been appointed as the first director of Galactic Defense, tasked with ensuring that no future threat would catch the galaxy unprepared. His first act had been to establish training centers where alien species could learn human military doctrine, which he summarized as, figure out what the enemy expects, then do something else. As the ceremony concluded and delegates from across the galaxy mingled in celebration, Chen found herself in conversation with a group of young beings from various species, the first generation to grow up in a galaxy where human thinking was considered normal. Ambassador Chen, asked a young crystalline mind whose surface sparkled with excitement. Is it true that humans once fought a war using exploding metal cylinders fired from chemical cannons? Artillery, yes, Chen replied. Though we also used rocks, sticks, and on at least one occasion, a very determined cavalry charge. The young beings looked at each other with expressions that could only be described as awe. They were growing up in a galaxy where innovation was prized over efficiency, where creativity was valued more than predictability, and where the phrase, "That's impossible," was treated as an invitation rather than a warning. "Ambassador," asked a young energy being pulsing with curiosity, "what should we do when we encounter a problem that seems unsolvable?" Chen smiled. "First, remember that there's no such thing as an unsolvable problem, only solutions you haven't thought of yet. Second, don't be afraid to try something that seems completely ridiculous. And third, when in doubt, ask yourself what a human would do, then do that, but with more explosions." As the celebration continued into the night, messages arrived from Earth reporting that humanity had been invited to join 12 different interstellar research projects, 6 cultural exchange programs, and 1 expedition to explore galaxies beyond their local group. The primitive backwater species that had been contacted out of desperation had become the most sought-after allies in known space. But perhaps the most important message came from the frontier worlds, where human exploration teams were making first contact with previously unknown species. They reported that word of humanity's approach to problem-solving had spread beyond the galaxy, and that civilizations they encountered were already familiar with concepts like creative stubbornness and tactical improvisation. Humanity had not just helped win a war. They had fundamentally changed how an entire galaxy thought about challenges, problems, and the art of turning impossible situations into unexpected victories. The age of cold logic and perfect efficiency was over. The age of magnificent chaos had begun, and across the stars, whenever someone faced impossible odds or unsolvable problems, they would remember the humans who had shown the galaxy that the best way to handle an immovable object was to become an unstoppable force that refused to acknowledge the laws of physics. After all, rules were just suggestions, and suggestions were made to be ignored by anyone creative enough to find a better way.